Our next speaker is Dr. Joseph McNamara, MD. Dr. Joseph McNamara was born and raised in Ireland. After graduating with honours from the prestigious medical school in Ireland, he practiced medicine for a number of years in the Dublin area, before moving to the United States, drawn there by what he felt was the most open-minded and exciting culture in the world. In the beautiful Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, he met and married his American wife, Marian. They have 2 children also in the area. He practiced traditional medicine for over 25 years as an emergency care and general practitioner doctor in family care. After many years of this service, he felt deeply called, and inspired, to utilize more expansive, more holistic methods of integral healing. He was inspired to offer new healing methods, ones that correlate more harmonically with his very deep spiritual calling, and his innate alternative healing knowledge. He followed his guidance, retired from the restrictions of traditional medicine, and opened a private clinic to practice a more holistic, more complete healing modality, which also allows him the freedom to focus time on speaking, lectures, metaphysical research, spirituality development and writing. He will be a featured speaker at the November 2015 Earthkeeper Gathering in Arkansas, and he will speak on his healing practice and cutting-edge holistic work. As part of the Earthkeeper family, he shares his vast knowledge of ancient Celtic wisdom and lore. He currently travels, giving presentations to forward-thinking organizations. He is working on a new book that explains innovative healing and cosmological theories in depth. In 2015, he opened a clinic utilizing his new, cutting-edge application of tachyon healing technology. He named his innovative clinic, Cara Ananam, which is Gaelic for Friend of the Soul. Dr. McNamara's Friend of the Soul Medical Counseling Center is in Virginia. Along with operating his healing center, and in addition to his healing practice, Dr. McNamara is working on several research projects, offers lectures, writes articles and is focusing on a new book. He lovingly shares his learnings, wisdom and theories in writings, practice and presentations, which combine rigorous science with spiritual belief and holistic healing. Enjoy the following fascinating presentation from Dr. McNamara, as he shares his knowledge of the true ancient beginnings of Ireland, and the forgotten true history of his beloved homeland. He shares brilliant, compelling and astonishing information on Ireland's intricate connections to Atlantis and Egypt. Enjoy, and Namaste.
While we have this space, I'd like to mention again that in November 20th through 23rd, we are having a gathering in a remarkable place, Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas, my home. And it is the largest single deposit of quartz crystal on the planet. It is an incredible energy. And there is also natural thermal springs that flow above the crystals, making them structured waters. The hotel that we have chosen pipes these thermal springs directly into the hotel spa. And we will have a crystal dig. We will be featuring Graham Hancock, John Van Auken, Dr. Samir Osmanagich, Andrew Collins. He's British. He's written books with Graham Hancock about Göbekli Tepe. Really a great speaker. Hugh Newman, who is, relative to me, a younger person. He's also British, and he is featured on the History Channel with some of his remarkable work on interesting subjects around planetary grids. His recent book is about the evidence of giants, and so he will be there as well. And William Henry, who is just a brilliant speaker. He's a scholar. He lives in Nashville, Tennessee. And we will have the Earthkeeper family. So please come join us. It's the week before Thanksgiving, and it is also at an auspicious time during a series of meteors. And so it will be a very special time. But it's a beautiful place, and if you have never been into that energy, it's a remarkable one to experience. Edgar Casey speaks about the body shift, and we think that it is Brazil and Arkansas that carry the largest crystal beds that will receive codes of the shift and put it through. So we hope you'll join us. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce a dear friend of ours, a member of the Earthkeeper family. So I'd like to introduce an absolutely wonderful man, born in Ireland, a medical doctor, and one of the kindest and loveliest people that I have ever known. A big Earthkeeper welcome for Dr. Joseph McNamara.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, begins with Atlantis. Now, this is a very busy slide, but I want to also show the major points of my talk. I'm not going to give a long, detailed description of Ireland. I just want to capture the main points because it's very important, I think, for people to realize the Atlantean connection and how the specific race traveled to Western Europe and formed a very distinct and unique culture there, which lasted for thousands of years. Okay. The first place I want to mention is this one here. It's called Cage of Fields. Cajun just means elevated. The oldest discovery, archaeological discovery in Ireland has been here in Cage of Fields. It's very clear that this was a settlement that really was not settled by a barbaric tribe, but more one that had already civilization within their group and that came from elsewhere. Atlantis was, of course, someplace down here and towards the southwest, further down to the southwest, but it would make sense, and you'll see later how, that they would settle in a place like this, first in the western part. Now, it may be that there are even older Atlantean settlements in Ireland, but this is the first one that has been discovered, and that was just very, very recently. The main development of the civilization was, generally speaking, from northwest to southeast, and the civilization actually crossed across the Irish Sea to Wales, Stonehenge, and continued on into Brittany, the Paris area, etc., etc. So I wanted to show that there's a trend, a distinct trend from northwest to southeast, carrying on into Western Europe. I wanted to show you something on Google Earth. It was discovered just a few years ago. This is an area of the Atlantic seen on Google Earth, and this is a structure. These are structures underneath the ocean, down as far as 3 miles. Just east of here are the Straits of Gibraltar. So just like Plato told us, Atlantis existed just west of the Pillars of Hercules. Also, Plato describes the other 2 islands, Poseidia and Aria, as being mountainous areas, and this is the ridge that goes down the middle of the Atlantic. And it's my surmise that the lower area here is Poseidia. The reason I say that is that directly east of here, on the 30-degree latitude, 60 degrees east of here is the Giza Plateau. So, in my estimation, Poseidia exists here. The other island is Aria, or Og, I'm going to call it Aria, is generally speaking in this area here. And if you examine that closely, you can see the remnants of buried pyramids and also a dome structure in the north. It has not been investigated, to my knowledge, but this is definitely a human structure that's not natural. There were other islands further to the west, which are not certainly catalogued by Plato. And there was another island further up here, which I'll show later, which was known as Yggdrasil by the Irish. Also, some of the more ancient books, like the Book of Enoch, myth and legends of many countries refer to Atlantis, and also the story of Noah really has been placed in the wrong time. I think a mistake has been made that everything has to fit in with the concept that the Sumerians were the first ever human civilization. That is simply not true, as our previous speakers have shown. So that the Noah, the flood story, is actually the destruction of Atlantis and other lands. So it wasn't just a period of bad weather in the Middle East, it was a worldwide catastrophe. Also, other books that relate to this are the books of Thoth, the Atlantean. I've already mentioned this, 60 degrees west of Giza. And my focus is on Aria, because the refugees from Poseidia generally tended to go west to North America and South America. And they were the red race, at least there was the, as described by Casey. But the people in Aria were of the white race, and that's why Europeans are white. Simple as that. And again, about 10,900 BC, at the cusp of the ages of Leo and Cancer, a worldwide catastrophe. I was describing earlier the satellite that once existed over the Earth, and also the firmament. And I was describing that above Atlantis there was a dome of ice crystals, and this made it very climate controlled. When we speak of Atlantis as being the golden age, it simply had to be perfect in every way. We had to have perfect climate, perfect growing season, and all year-round growing season. It had to be safe from bad weather, tornadoes, volcanoes, earthquakes. Simply were not allowed. This was a perfect civilization in every way. However, all good things must come to an end. And I believe it was a planetoid. I can't prove that, but if it was a crystalline structure, we would have very little evidence of it. And as Graham has pointed out, the planetoid tended to strike an area that was covered by ice anyway. The impact was enormous. It's difficult to underestimate it. It threw into the atmosphere large quantities of water vapor. The shield itself, the dome above the Earth, was shattered. So, according to the Bible, and a lot of these stories are true. We've been sort of taught that they're just legend, they're just myth, and you can believe them or not, but they were in fact true. There was a deluge, 40 days and 40 nights. It was just horrendous. It was severely life-threatening. The impact itself onto the ice cap caused enormous tsunamis. Even David Hatcher-Childress showed us at Tiwanaku, the flood caused damage there. This is how high the water got. It was incredibly awful, a tremendously devastating experience for the people that lived on planet Earth. It came, generally speaking, from the northeast to the southwest, and the impact caused a pole shift. At that time, the North Pole, the Earth spun around the axis, which was in Greenland. It also caused the angle of the axis of the Earth to go from 9 degrees to 23.5 degrees. It also caused the planet Earth itself to spin into a wider orbit. It went from a year went from 360 to 365 days, and it really threw everything out of gear completely. It was a devastating experience. I mentioned about the firmament being shattered. If you're familiar with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he wrote a poem, a visionary poem called Kublai Khan. And if you read it, if it's there to be seen, he, in a very visionary experience, describes what I believe is a vision from Atlantis. I mentioned that in the night sky there were actually 2 moons, and the word luna is what we have for the moon, and it's the root also of the word alone. So now we have a night body that is alone. Also, Sol is actually the name of our sun. And that is the root word for solitary, because we now have only one light in the daytime rather than what we had back then, which was 2. Okay, now I must describe now the Irish legends. According to Irish legends, there were actually 5 islands, and they were called Falias, Murias, Gorias, Phineas, and also the other one that I mentioned called Ibrasil. Now, those names don't mean much, so in the Irish legends, they have more descriptive terms. I speak Gaelic, so I'll translate these for you. One was called Tir Tarngere, and it translates as the land of promise. There was a Tir Fitin, which means the land beneath the waves, which could be anyone. Tir Nanog, and that's where I think Og is actually pronounced Og, because in the Gaelic language it's called Og. Tir Nanog translates as the land of youth, and I believe this was Aria, because even post-deluge there were legends of heroes and heroines in the Irish or Celtic tradition that went back in time and got trapped in a time warp and became permanently, how shall I say, they lived in a land of eternal youth, which was the land of Atlantis. We had a lifespan then of hundreds of years. When they talk of Noah and Methuselah living 900 years, that wasn't a mistake. That's actually true. We lived for very, very long periods of time. And according to the Irish legends, when they then come back to Ireland, they immediately age by hundreds of years because they've got to catch up with the present time, and that can be quite catastrophic. Another island was Mai Mau. That means the plain of sweetness, and I believe that refers to the flat land of Atlantis. I spelled it as Aslan, but that's what it was known as amongst the Indian people. Another island was Tir na Meo. That means the land of the living. And I relate that to the island of Ibrasil. Closer to Ireland, just southwest of Ireland, there is an underwater ridge. It's part of the continental shelf. Let me see if it comes up next, because I need to show you this. Ah, good. Okay. So you have Ireland here, but if you look along here, this is called the Porcupine Ridge, and it's called Porcupine. There's no porcupines in Ireland, but HMS Porcupine was the Royal Naval vessel that helped to lay the original telephone cable between Britain and the United States. And so this area here is called the Porcupine Ridge. It's a very favorite place for a lot of the fishing trawlers from Ireland to go, because there's an upwelling of water from here and bringing up nutrients from the deep, and so there are huge shoals of fish here. But you can see you've got a river here. So this is a very, very ancient river that fell. It must have been very beautiful at that time, falling down from the heights and going into an ancient sea. You can't see it, but it actually ends, the river ends about here. And you can find that on Google Earth too. It's They're not hiding that. So this is where this island was called Ybrasil. And I think Graham Hancock also has shown us that the devastation was not just a one punch. It came in a couple of waves. And it's my belief that then Ybrasil actually went down later in another inundation. It has an interesting history because all of the medieval maps that mariners had in Europe before the discoveries by Columbus show an island here, and they called it Ybrasil. And when the Portuguese explorers literally bumped into South America, they thought they had found the island of Brasil, so they called it Brasil. And that's why the large country in South America is called Brazil, or we call it in English Brazil. But it's based on the Irish legend. But in fact, Ybrasil was actually here. And there's a family name in Ireland, and there's a street name in Dublin. It's called Clanbrassil Street. So there's a Brasil family that lives in Ireland. Okay, yeah. In all of the ancient texts, they speak about the people that survived and came to these lands, Ireland, as being the noble ones. They were the prophets and the seers who had forecasted that catastrophe and were able to lead their people to the lands of Western Europe. Casey describes the Pyrenees as being another area where a lot of people arrived. And also even the Etruscan people, he said, were descended of Atlanteans. Now this were whites. They were, we call them Caucasian now, but in fact they never came from the Caucasus. Often our history is the exact opposite of what we're told. We're told that the white people came from the east and moved west. It was the other way. They landed on the west coast and moved east. It happened much earlier. Now later on, there certainly was movements of tribes from the east to the west. Yes, that's true. But the Atlantean, the white Atlanteans, came to Western Europe and moved east from there. And they were blonde and red-haired, and in fact, a lot. Even David Hatcher Childress mentioned that the people that were found that still had hair in South America were red-haired people. Also, Quetzalcoatl was described as having red hair and being white also. Okay. This is not just theory. This is actual science now. So in the last 20 years, the Human Genome Project has delineated a lot of interesting markers. There's on the female side, there's the chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA, and you can trace the female line through that. On the X chromosome, there are other markers, and they're actually more useful for delineating specific racial groups. And on the male chromosome, the people of Western Europe have mainly what's called the Atlantic modal haplotype, or as I like to call it, the Atlantis modal haplotype. And I said they migrated from west to east. They traveled quite great distances. We tend to think that, in fact, that we've been taught that the people of this time were very stupid, very aggressive, and very uncivilized. This is not true. The dioramas that they show, they're in animal skins, they're wearing big clubs, and they look very fierce, and certainly not somebody you would like to meet. But this is a gross distortion. Our ancestors were just as wise as we think we are. But they reached Egypt. They reached the Gobi Desert in western China. They reached the Indus, the Mahabharata and all that. They speak, well, again, I think it's a mistranslation. They speak about the Aryan invasion. I think it was the Aryan migration. I think people in those times did plenty of travel. They were not as ignorant as we've been led to believe. The people from Aria came to Éire, which is the Gaelic or Irish name for Ireland, and Alba is the old name for Britain. A lot of the English poets still refer to Britain as being Albion, and that's where it comes from. It comes from the old Celtic word Alba. Both Britain and Ireland are called the Fortunate Isles, and it's probably because with the dynamics of the tsunamis, these two islands were probably less devastated than the other regions. And as I mentioned earlier, these people also migrated to Gaul and Iberia. And Gaul is not just the old name for France. The Romans also described the Gauls as living in northern Italy. It was known as Cisalpine Gaul, and what we now call France was Transalpine Gaul. Places like Milan. Milan was an old Celtic city, and Genoa as well. And this civilization settled all along the western seaboard of Europe, from the Orkney Islands and they're north of Scotland to Alcantara in southern Portugal. And there you can see their buildings, their structures, their monoliths. Okay, I mentioned earlier that the oldest archaeological find is in Cage of Fields, and it's been dated, carbon dated to 5,500 BC. And it's very interesting because the reason it wasn't discovered until then is that a large climate change occurred. Once we lost the protective layer of the firmament, and we were no longer climate controlled. And with the tilt of the Earth, seasons became much more severe, and of course we were further away a little bit further away from the sun. There was massive climate change, and the climate change in Ireland changed drastically. It became much more wet and cold, and any of you that's been to Ireland, even in the summertime, it can be very cold. So with that damp climate, a large forest grew, and Ireland became just a very forested island, although today it's the least forested country in Europe, because as Ken was saying, a lot of the major ships that were part of the British Navy came from the oaks of Ireland. But as the forest disappeared in Ireland, the poor people resorted to digging into bogs for fuel. And I must just describe the bogs because most people don't know what a bog is. As the trees fell, they did not dematerialize completely. It went through anaerobic decay. And as more trees came and fell, they never reverted back to their original constituents. It built up a layer of partially decomposed plant matter. And so most of the bogs in Ireland are very, very deep, and they can track the hundreds and thousands of years that have gone by through that. However, as time went by and the people cut away the bogs to use it as fuel, some of my summer days, especially around August time before the harvest, we would go to the bog. It was actually a fun thing to do at the time, at least in childhood you think it's fun. And you would cut away these wet sods and leave them up on the top, and then they would just dry in the wind. And then you would take them back to your home and burn them as fuel, especially during the wintertime. So, and in this area, well, the map showed you where it was. They got down to bedrock, but instead of just reaching bedrock, they actually discovered a settlement underneath this bog, which was meters deep. And this showed the same pattern that I showed you on Google Earth. It was a reticulated pattern. It was not what you would think in terms of a primitive development, which usually involves a few huts surrounding each other and usually some sort of a defensive structure. The people who settled here did not experience warfare. And so they were peaceful people. And as I will show you further on, they also had a very deep connection to the earth, and they worshiped the goddess energies. Okay, this is an actual pictogram of that haplogroup that I mentioned. It's the R1b haplogroup. And it's color-coded, so the densest purple is in Ireland. And there you have 80% of the people, 80% of the males in Ireland have this particular gene type. And there's a trend, as you can see, as you go further east, it becomes diluted. In Scotland, you can also see this area here. And they still speak Gaelic in that part of Scotland. Has the same density. The old Celtic lands of Cornwall. The Cornish was a Celtic language that was spoken even to about 100 years ago. Wales and England, it became overwhelmed really by Germanic tribes and then by the Norman invasions. Brittany is a part of France, and you don't call a person from Brittany French, because they say they're Breton and they speak their own language there. It's a Celtic language called Breton. In the north of Spain, you have Galicia, you have Asturias, and the Basque region of both France and Spain. And there you can see another high proportion of that racial grouping. And they have their own language here in the Basque region. And again, you don't call them Spanish, you call them Basque. They are very insistent that they're very different. And if you listen to the music from Western France and from Northern Spain, you will think it's Irish music, but it's not. It's from these lands here. But they obviously are of the same racial group. It doesn't quite show it here, but the epistle of Paul to the Galatians. Galatia is this area here. It's not. It doesn't show it quite clearly now, but around Ankara was a Celtic area also. Anything basically that had the initial two words GA tended to refer to these people. In Ireland, we speak Gaelic. In Scotland, in the north of Scotland, they speak Gaelic. There's Galicia in Spain. There's Galicia also in southern Poland, western Ukraine. The Greeks referred to anybody that lived north and west of Greece as being Celtic, and it was a derogatory term to the Greeks, and so unfortunately it stuck. And so this race of people are called Celts, but as I will show, they had a different name for themselves. Now there is an aspect of missing time. If the destruction occurred in 10,900 BC, the first settlement was 5,500. We're missing about 4,000 years, and I believe that. Because also there are legends in the southwest of this country that many of the people fled underground, and there's a system of tunnels which we're becoming more aware of, and David Hatcher Childers hinted at that, called Agartha. And the Hopis as well believe that they spent considerable amounts of time with a more advanced race that still lived underground. So in a way, our official history is okay, in that the first, the rebirthing of civilization, first rebirthing was in Sumer. But there were considerable amounts of people that were still underground in these tunnel systems and in the cities that we know now exists underground. Okay. The Greeks called these Western people Celtic, but they actually, the name for them that they called themselves was the Tuatha De Danann. Tuatha means the people of, and De is the genitive of God or goddess, and Danann is the genitive form of Danu. So they believe themselves to be followers of the goddess Danu. A matriarchal society. And as on the previous map I showed you, as the tribes of people moved further east, Danu left her name on the land, and the longest river in Europe is called the Danube, and it's named after her. And even as you go further east into Ukraine, the rivers Don and Dnieper are also named after Danu. Okay, you've often heard of Druids. Everybody wants to be a Druid these days. I must point out that the root of the word druid has come into the English language, and if you pronounce it in the Celtic way, druid the D is softened, so it becomes like druth. So you can see how druth eventually became truth, and these were the truth bearers that brought the message of the law of one from Atlantis to these new lands. And the Druid was a combination of priest, scientist, and mariner, and they were the leaders of an advanced remnant from Atlantis. They were missionaries, and even the great master Pythagoras, he learned from a Druid called Erebus. The language was Ogham. I know you've probably seen that word and you think it's pronounced Ogham. The H tends to delete the previous consonant, so you're left with O-A-M, which is pronounced Om, believe it or not. The old language of these people, they call it Om, and you've heard that before. It consisted of 13 characters. I won't go into it, but the three most ancient languages that we know are Gaelic, Sanskrit, and Ainu, and that's the language of northern Japan. In fact, Sanskrit can be interpreted in Gaelic as Shanshriv, which means old script. Now later there was a migration from east to west, and I must also describe the connection which exists between Ireland and Egypt, and there's going to be a speaker, I believe, tomorrow, Dr. Jerry, who's going to explain that or delineate that much more clearly. As part of the investigation of Tutankhamun that was done, again, about 20 years ago by Zahi Hawass, not everything he does is bad. This was actually pretty good. They actually got a DNA sample from Tutankhamun. So there was a lot of speculation. Is Tutankhamun and the Egyptian nobility, are they African? Are they Middle Eastern? You know, it was going to be really exciting to find out where these people came from. And to their shock and amazement, they had the Atlantic haplotype. So in other words, the elites that came from Atlantis were the white race that settled also in the Western European lands. Now, over time, Egypt obviously deteriorated. There was great upheaval amongst the political classes in Egypt. And so Meritaten, that was mentioned earlier, and Akhenaten, they either fled the country or were murdered. Tutankhamun was, his birth name was Tutankhaten, but it was changed after the Civil War to Tutankhamun. It became very dangerous for anybody related to that family to remain in Egypt. And Skota, his half-sister, fled the country and came to what's now known as Spain, and she married one of the chieftains there. She with him, took an army and landed in the south coast of Ireland. She claimed queenship over Ireland, then moved on to Scotland and claimed queenship there. And this is where we get the word Scotland. It's actually named after Skota, who's the half-sister of Tutankhamun. Up until the medieval times, there was no distinction between Irish people and Scottish people. They were all called Scottish people, as in subservient to Queen Skota. I wanted to show you this. This is not Egypt. This is Ireland, believe it or not. In Cage of Fields, you can actually visit. This is the visitor center here, and it's really strange. Why did they build it as a pyramid? I don't know. Maybe somebody knew something and built it this way. But it's a visitor center. You can have your tea and scones there, and there's a cliff over the far side. It's stunningly beautiful. This is the walkway up towards it. It's a reclaimed bog. There's no trees there, absolutely. But they will show you a diorama as to the cutting down of the bog and then of the settlement that was discovered underneath. and it's called Cage of Fields. That's the entranceway in. There are some psychics who believe that, in fact, there are drowned pyramids off the coast of Ireland. I have no proof of that. Certainly, the island, which Ken mentioned earlier, Skellig Vihil, it is in Gaelic. It looks very like a pyramid, but I think it's a natural pyramid. It's not a man-made pyramid. Okay. There are many, many structures which we still have. As I say, fortunately, Ireland was not subject to the invasions from the east that the other lands, even Britain, suffered. And in general, the most commonly seen object from the antediluvian, the pre-flood buildings are pyramids. There are hundreds of them in China. There are many, many around the world, obviously, as our previous speakers have shown. But the destruction of Atlantis was such that the technologies which we had were lost. We had an idea, we understood the science, but we just couldn't build pyramids anymore. We simply couldn't do them. The gods abandoned us. They took to their vimanas and headed off out into space. So thank you for that. Anyhow, but post-Diluvian, after the flood, the people built mounds. They're like knockdown pyramids. They exist in this country, obviously through the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. In Ireland, there are very, very significant mounds, and I will describe those. If you want to study the ones in the United States and elsewhere, they're very, very good. I mean, they're the same technology. There are so many remnants of this civilization in Ireland that some people call Ireland a temple without walls. You cannot really walk any place for any significant period of time without literally stumbling over some very, very ancient structure. Now, if you read about them, they're called passage graves, and again, I think everything has been misnamed and mislabeled. Pyramids have been called tombs, and they're not tombs. So we should call them something else, but they're not tombs. And these mounds are not passage graves. They do have passageways, but they're not graves. Certainly, there were some ceremonies associated with the death process, but nobody was buried in these mounds. There are also stone circles. There are also mounds that have what are called courts associated with them, and I will show you one of those. There are dolmens, which are also seen in variants around the world. And some of them have to have subterranean chambers, but most don't. There are also freestanding stones, monoliths themselves. Now, they don't in any way compare with the monoliths that the previous speaker shows, which were like, as they showed, up to 1,000 tons. These were arranged, brought by humans. There was no unusual technology involved in building these mounds and arranging these monoliths. And there are also henges, and I will describe those as well. Okay, I could refer back to the previous map, but I showed you there was a general trend of the development from northwest to southeast. And again, they call it a tomb. I disagree with that, but we'll let that stand. The first mound that was built in Ireland was one called Carramore, and unfortunately, just with the passage of time, most of them have collapsed, and all you can see are just this jumble of stones here. And it wasn't destroyed. It just decayed just over time because they're made from natural substances, and the clay just washed away. The weather can be severe, and you don't notice it here, but they're built on high ground. So not in mountains per se, but certainly high hills to keep them above the underlying forest, which was there at the time. So unfortunately, Carramore is really uninterpretable, at least not by common archaeological means. This is an example of a stone circle. We visited that particular one when we were there in 2012. And yeah, they're all individual monoliths, but all in a perfect circle. And that was where we were, at Lochgar in County Limerick. And this gives you the impression of a court. If you look at this as like a horseshoe shape, the mound itself has collapsed, but you can see the passageway then. You can enter in, and I will describe probably what happened in these mounds. It's a court mound. That's a dolmen, that's a Pool na Brone in County Clare, and a very important energetic structure in and of itself. And there were individual standing stones, and you can find them all absolutely all over the place. There's one, but there's just thousands of them. There's just too numerous to count. And some of them have very impressive designs on them. Some have interpreted them, and some remain uninterpretable. But as you can see, there are designs here involving animal shapes, which you see all over the world. This one is specifically at Tara. That probably is not the original stone. It's historian in and of itself, and I won't go into that now because I think we're running a little short of time. It's called the Stone of Destiny. The theory is that if you had possession of this, you had possession of Ireland, because you basically can see, if you look in a 360 direction, you basically can see most of the country. And it was the seat of the High King of Ireland. Okay. In Ireland, these are called fairy forts. And as you can see, the farmer who's tilling his fields, he distinctly avoids these, because there's an idea that if you impinge on this space here, that the fairies will get you. The fairies can be impish, and they can make your life misery, destroying your cattle or your crops or whatever. So these are seen all over the place. They're not, what they are actually are henges. And there are two types of henges. There are stone henges, and you're very aware of the one in Britain, which is called Stonehenge. But the vast majority were wood henges, built in exactly the same way. But because they're organic, they disappeared long ago. But the round locations of them are seen absolutely up and down the country, and most farmers wish they were in there, but they are. It's a wood henge. Yes, they have different sizes, but there were. I will show you later. There was actually a bigger Stonehenge in Ireland at one time. So we'll get through that. This is obviously Stonehenge in England. The Stonehenge in Ireland no longer exists, but we will. Okay, there we go. Now, when you go to Ireland, I know most people don't have a whole lot of time, so I will give a recommendation. The best sites to see are generally speaking in two locations. One is near Dublin. It's called the Boyne Valley Complex, and you can get lost in that for a long time. But at least if you've got, let's say, 3 days, you could base yourself in that area. You could stay in Dublin if you like the city environs. But bed and breakfasts are very, very reasonable, and they love Americans. They're very, very welcome there. But this is, unfortunately, all that's left. It's just a drawing made by a visitor to Ireland in the late 18th century, and it's in a town called Ballynahatton, and it's about 50 miles northeast of the Boyne complex. And it consists of multiple ditches and dikes, and it had many stones in 3 circles, as you can see. Since the discovery of this, and this is really quite a remarkable find, the Irish government has bought the land, and they will be trying to reconstruct it as much as possible. So in the years to come, this will be a place to visit, and it's much bigger, actually. The British Stonehenge would fit probably just in the middle of that. So and there's an old legend that Merlin, when he wanted to give a gift to King Arthur after his many magnificent victories, the story is that he transported a Stonehenge from Ireland and set it in Britain as a gift to King Arthur. That's very unlikely, I would think, but nonetheless, it shows that in olden times there was an awareness of there being a large Stonehenge in Ireland. And that's the largest henge in the world. And again, that's just a Stonehenge. I mean, a Woodhenge, and that's another one. They're just all over the place. Again, they often can be in series. You know, I'm not sure what that is. It looks natural, so I'll pass on. Oh, Carrickeel. Okay, now I see it. Okay. That's from a distance, and I didn't recognize it. Okay, that once Carramore fell in, well, shall I say, the mounds had different uses. There were observation areas, and over time, they were no longer useful. So instead of rearranging the mound to suit them, they would actually build a whole series of new mounds. So Carrickeel is built on a series of hills further southeast, again from Carramore. And actually the best court tomb is actually in this area. It's called Creevykeel. Again, in megalithics, they use the word cemetery, and it's not a cemetery, but there we go. Okay, and that's all quartz. Again, it's the same old story. Crystals were very, very important to these ancient peoples, and these mounds were lined with quartz. And so at that time, seeing them from a distance, especially if the sun was shining, they looked like brilliant jewels perched high on the hills. Okay, Carramore is now a ruin. It really can't be interpreted so. Okay, the peoples that came to these lands had two basic questions to answer, and that is, what time is it, and where am I? Where are we? And they're both related concepts. The devastation was so severe that they really had to take stock of everything from the bottom up. So they had to find where they were. And the only way to know where you are is to look at the stars, and then you know where you are. Also, what time it is. I mean, our time. I know we wear watches, but our time is based on sidereal time. Basically, it's our passage through the cosmos. That is what time is. And so, Carrickeel was aligned with Cassiopeia, and it's you know, most observatories look to the south sky, but at Carrickeel it actually focused on the north, which seems counterintuitive. But if the pole star had changed, and it was Alpha Draconis during the Atlantean times, it moved to what we now call Polaris. So Cassiopeia is very close to the North Pole star. So it appears that they were trying to get a bearing on the axis of the Earth. Once they gained knowledge, as much knowledge as they needed from Carrickeel, they again abandoned it and moved on further southeast to a place called Lough Crew. We almost visited that when we were in Ireland. And so a whole new series of mounds were built, again on highlands. And this, they simply studied the sun. And it's clear from the markings, from the art, they call it art, but it probably was instructive as well, that they had 5 days in each week. This image here is of the Milky Way. It was significant in that the ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile and all of the temples surrounding the Nile were a reflection of the Milky Way, and of the various important constellations were reflected on the earth, the principle of as above and so below. And the same in Ireland. The Boyne was, even though it's not the biggest river in Ireland, it was the most important river in Ireland, because all of the structures, the buildings are in the Boyne Valley complex, and there are hundreds of them, were aligned with those important constellations in the sky, specifically in the Milky Way. Even the name Boyne itself in Gaelic, it's Bowen, and Bow is the Irish for a cow. So again, milk, cow, and even Isis, she's shown with wearing cow horns. So this again reflects the understanding that we're fractals of the oneness. Bowen represents the Milky Way. And so we come to really the iconic image of Ireland. If you pull up anything on Ireland, you'll see an image usually of Newgrange. And Newgrange is an anglicised version of the Irish Uathna Gréine, which means Temple of the Sun, and you've heard that one before. It studied Sirius, and it focused on precession. It was really nice of Graham to mention that the ancients did know about precession, and this showed that they had a very sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. It's not easy to see precession, because as he described, it takes 70 years for 1 degree of arc change in precession. Precession is where it appears as if we're going backwards through the zodiac. And at Newgrange, there's the very iconic image of a large stone at the entrance, and there's a cleft or a mark on the top of it there. So at the winter solstice, the rising sun, if it's not cloudy, will actually come through that cleft and into the center of the chamber itself. It's very, very sophisticated and still works to this day. It looks as if the peoples of that time understood that we belong to a trinary star system, because it shows a trispiral that are all interconnected. We are connected not only empathically, but physically connected with Sirius, and both Sirius A and Sirius B. And the people then understood that. And were able to, as I say, mark the progression through the years. And I wanted to show this, although it didn't come out very clearly, that 72, and in fact, Graham showed that too, the 72 times 360 gives you the galactic year of 25,920. So our basic understanding of matter and materiality is all based on geometry and numerology. There is a reconstruction of Newgrange. It's probably not the way it looked long ago, because when it was restructured, they placed a lot of the quartz back on the front. They just sort of stuck it there. So it may or may not have looked like that in times past. But it's a very impressive mound, and it still works to this day. You can still quantify precession, and you can still see the winter solstice sun rising if the weather is good. And there's a higher picture of it. Also, it shows in the far distance there another mound called Knowth, Knowwth. And that again is another image of Newgrange, and that's the iconic image of the stone at the entrance. And you can see the trispiral, and that mark in the middle is a tiny little cleft, and that was their guide mark as they looked at the sky. And now we get to Nouth. And this focused on the moon. The moon has a very complicated cycle. It takes 19 years for the moon to come back to exactly the same spot in the sky again. So it's very complicated in many ways. So they had to observe that with a specific observatory. And this is Nouth, and it's a very interesting. It has lovely artwork, and it has these mini mounds around it, and nobody's really too sure what the mini mounds involve. And then the third in that triplet is called Douth, and it's interesting that Egyptian underworld is called the Duat, and it is the time or the place of darkness. And Douth in the Gaelic language is Dúr, which means the exact same thing. It means darkness or night. And this study the Pleiades. Again, we're seeing the same old in terms of Sirius, Pleiades. These obviously have played a very important part in our development as a species. This is Douth. It's completely undeveloped, so all you can see there is the mount. There is an entrance on the far side, but that's all. It has not been disturbed at all. And going further southeast again, and it's just north of Dublin, is a place called Fornox. Again, mistranslation. For is Fur. Fur means cold, so it means cold hills. And it studied Cygnus. I know that some ancient cultures, Cygnus was very important. It lies between the Pleiades and the galactic center, so it gave them some sort of an idea of where galactic center was, and that's probably why they focused on Cygnus. It also is called the Northern Star. The stars in the constellation, they move together, so it gives an unusual formation in the sky that doesn't actually move with time. I mean, the whole constellation moves, but the stars in the constellation do not move in reference to Earth. It's also a major source of cosmic rays, and this is probably why a lot of civilizations went underground to avoid these damaging rays. Our lifespan decreased from probably 900, certainly a multiple of hundreds of years, to 70. And so a lot of the work, I believe that a lot of the Druids did actually occurred either in the mounds or underground. We can still see cosmic rays with our eyes. If we close our eyes and see those little sparkles on our retina, those are the cosmic rays actually impacting on our retina. But you can go underground, and that effect is gone. And there's Fornox. It's a series of mounds. Not a lot of work has been done on them. And again, this reiterates what I said before. The civilization moved from northwest to southeast, went over to Anglesey in Wales. It became known as the school of the Druids, and the Romans destroyed it. Actually, it almost ended in disaster for the Romans, because as they moved west into Wales, Queen Boudica moved south and almost destroyed the settlement at London, but she unfortunately was defeated. So also moved from the line moves down towards the Stonehenge complex, which also involves Avebury and Glastonbury. As you go further across the English Channel, you come to Karnak, which has an interesting name in itself, because there's a place in Egypt called Karnak. Also, there's an island just off the coast of Brittany called, and the French call it Gavarnie, but I see that as Gaelic. It's Scaur Inish. It means Goat Island. Then the trend is further to the southeast, and you come to what the Celts called Per-Isis, which is Isis again. We now know it as Paris, but Per is an Egyptian word. It means house. In fact, a pyramid is a Greek derivation of perneter, which means a powerhouse or an energy house. And then you go further southeast again, and you come to the old Gallic capital of Bibracte, which was destroyed by Julius Caesar. And of course, being the victor, he got to write the history. But Ireland escaped the Roman reign of terror, and so we're very blessed to still have a lot of the constructions from that ancient time. I mentioned about the Stonehenge, four outer circle outside a rampart in a ditch, and they were a series of three circles of stone on the inside. Okay. Ireland is blessed with a lot of artwork. So they not only built these stones, but they decorated them, and this is some seen at Lough Crew, and they can be interpreted in various ways. Of course, we've dealt with that. That one can be easily interpreted as a tri-spiral representing our trinary star system. And in fact, the whole effect of precession is considered to be the magnetic field from Sirius B is so strong that it seems to pull the Earth backwards as it's going through its normal rotation. Okay. The mounds themselves had different reasons for being built. Obviously they were used as astronomical observatories, but the passageway itself consisted of a series of standing stones, and they were used as resonators, and they still resonate to the male voice. And they were formed in a cruciform pattern. I hope I have a picture of that. And I just wanted to make the correlation as the Templars came back from the Crusades. They brought building techniques and building ideas with them, and they began to build these Gothic churches built in a cruciform pattern. And of course, they're built to honor the Master Jesus, but it's an ancient pattern to build important religious and spiritual buildings in that cruciform pattern. And if you go inside the mound, specifically the one at Newgrange, you will see also, you come to the end and there's a domed roof or a corbelled roof, and most churches also have a dome at the end. And this has got to do with resonation, or the standing waves of resonance. Also, just like there are no soot marks in the pyramids, there are no soot marks in the mounds. So the ceremonies were obviously carried out in darkness, and no doubt they had psychoactive plants to help them with the access to higher realms. And also, if you ever are at a concert in a church, the best place to be is at the intersection of the cross, because that's where the resonant frequencies are the best. So that's just a tip. Newgrange, you can see that the entrance point is here, and it forms a cross. So the maximum point of resonance is right there. Some mounds have two passageways. The technology that tried to mimic what the pyramid does is seen in cross-section here. I must first describe a pyramid. It has an outer layer of limestone, which tends to be insulating, and it has an inner layer of granite, which is like a large crystal. And in the mound system, they tried to mimic this in terms of having just simple dirt, clay, and alternate them with rows of quartz. So you have an insulator, a conductor, an insulator, a conductor, an insulator, a conductor, and this to any electrician is a way to store charge. So it's an accumulator. And no doubt they wanted to accumulate orgone as an energy to discharge in whatever way they want to do. And this is a simple passageway. This would go out to the entrance, and this formed a cross here. orgone accumulator. Okay, also, which is really fascinating, and I discovered this myself, these mounds were not just built, just on high points. They were built specifically in very important places. In ancient times, there was a grid around the Earth, and it was no doubt part of the Atlantean grid, which made it such a wonderful place to live. Newgrange is 60 degrees of arc from the Great Pyramid, but that also makes it 60 degrees of arc from the period of Poseidia. So it forms a perfect triangle between Newgrange, Poseidia, and the Great Pyramid. Also, all of the mounds, and in fact, all of the standing stones, all are associated with flowing water. The Great Pyramid is absolutely honeycombed, as you've heard, with many streams of water. It measured precession, which gave the number of the great year. Standing stones show increased magnetic fields, and if you have the proper equipment, you can see that it actually has 7 chakras, and the lowest 2 are underground. You saw the other structures in other places where the head might be above the ground, but there was actually a part that was below the ground. And so these standing stones are the same. They're not just sort of parked just on their tip. They actually are embedded in the earth, just like an acupuncture needle. And touching them calibrates you to the Schumann frequency. Again, there's always underground water flow beneath even a single standing stones. Stone circles focus the energy at the very center. So no doubt the candidate or the client was moved to the center of the healing circle, and each one who were involved in the healing process was in contact with each of the stones. And this was shown in the pictures you've seen of the city of Atlantis itself, which is named after Atlas, the son of Zeus, and it was laid out as a series of concentric circles. Again, there's nothing new under the sun. They just keep on repeating it in various ways. There are healing wells. There's a very interesting one. I could talk about structured water, which is in these. And Tubber and Alt, if you want to stay in the Sligo area, stay in the Newgrange area, the next place to go would be in the Sligo area. And there you can visit a wonderful Druid well called Tubber and Alt. It just means high well. And there's an image of it. It's hard to see, but you can find it on the internet. But as it's Saturday night and we're all tired, maybe I should leave it at that, okay? So thank you. Appreciate it. Namaste. Namaste.